peyote button, Lophophora williamsii, in the gravelly clay of habitat. Or is it? Today we're talking all about habitat staging. And you might be wondering, what on earth is habitat staging? What's he talking about? Well, very simply put, it's where art meets cultivation. It's the recreation of the appearance of a plant's natural habitat in pot culture, just like I've attempted to do for this little peyote button here. Now, I'm certainly no expert when it comes to this interesting part of cultivation. There are some people out there who are far more practiced and far more expert in this area, but I do think it's quite a curious thing. And so I thought it was well worth sharing it with you and showing you some of the plants that I've habitat staged and the processes that I might follow if I was going to do some more. So stick around and let's see how we can bring art into the greenhouse. So you've seen my little peyote in my attempt at recreating the deserts of northern Mexico in my greenhouse in Australia. This is a top dressing using a bit of clay, some rocks, some gravel, all the sorts of things that you might hope to find this plant growing in habitat. But I'm also going to share with you another pot. This here is a pot of Lapidaria margaretae. Now, these are plants that grow in southern Africa in quartz fields where you've got this fine red dirt amongst all these sort of quartzy pebbles, and amongst them, camouflaged, the lapidarias themselves. Now, essentially what I've done is I've looked at photos of these plants in habitat and sourcing local materials, done my very best to reproduce that appearance. Don't necessarily know if it's the most effective thing. Like I said, this is the second one of these I've ever tried. But hopefully today we're going to inspire you to give it a crack yourselves. You never know. You might turn into one of these experts that I'll be following in the footsteps of one day. So let's just jump in and put together some plants, shall we? I'm going to do 2 pots today, 2 very different styles. Let's start off with some euphorbias, because hey, euphorbias are so rad. Here we go. I've been wanting to repot this Euphorbia obesa hybrid for quite some time, and this seems like the opportune moment. At some point a caterpillar got in, chewed out the growth point, and that's why there's these offsets coming up all over the plant. Now, the first thing I've done is I've researched visually what Euphorbia obesa habitats look like, and well, the results are pretty striking. Very dry, very rocky, with lots of dead vegetation all over the place. So what I've done is I've gathered some things that I think, well, maybe when we put them together, they'll approximate that. So apart from my Euphorbia itself, here's what I've got. First of all, and quite importantly, I've got some companions for it. All up, I've got 4 slightly smaller plants. I've also got a couple of little seedlings, just to add a bit of variety size-wise, because the pot I'm going to be putting them in is this big old bonsai dish. So there's going to be a few plants in there, which, you know, a bit of variety of size I think is going to make it more interesting. Pertinently, I've got a mix of male and female plants. I want this to be practical, not just visually enticing. I want to be able to pollinate these plants and get more seeds out of them so I can keep the Euphorbia obesa train rolling on into future generations. Now, the other things that I've collected, while I've been out and about, picked up some rocks. I like, every time I go out, I just keep an eye open for any kind of visually striking rocks that I can see, and I grab them just in case, because you never know when you're going to need something interesting. I've also got, oh, the mosquitoes are going nuts in here today. Just a dead stick, dead weed that I pulled up off the driveway. I've got some decomposed granite here, which may end up being a top dressing. I don't know yet. I'm just going to improvise as we go. Now, the top dressing is a key word, because although this might look very dense, very sort of almost clay-like in its particles, that's just going to be the top layer. We're still going to be using a nice, really well draining, highly mineral substrate, because, you know, we don't want these plants to die. The reason that I'm not going to use that fine, almost clay-like substance all throughout in the creation of this is because essentially the drainage properties of a pot very different to the drainage properties of, you know, habitat. You know, if I use exactly the same soil all throughout the pot, I could well be spelling these plants to an early death. Anyway, so that's what I've got. Oh, and the last thing we might need, very fine little paintbrush, just to get in and do any fine details. You never know when you're going to need it. From there, we're going to put it together. We're going to improvise a little bit. You never know how this is going to look. Might look like absolute rubbish when we're finished. Let's just find out now, shall we? Probably worth pointing out as well, I've got a little bit of fly screen just to cover up the hole in that pot. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put down this rock. This rock, I suppose, is going to be a bit of a centerpiece. The most visually striking point of this pot, apart from the big old obesa itself. So that might just sit there. In fact, what I might do to start off is put a very, very thin layer of my substrate, just for things to sit on as I start mucking around with these. Now, I'm gonna just put these things in with a bit of an approximation of how I think they may end up. Now that rock I'm pretty happy with, and I think it's going to pair nicely with the big obesa at the back, so that can just sit there. Let's try and not knock any more of the offsets off. Clumsiness does not help easily with this, and of course now I've got sap pouring out of that. Fantastic, great start. Now visually, I think these plants probably will go nicely if you keep them as even numbers. It's one of those design things. I don't know where that comes from. Someone somewhere figured out that things in 3s or 1s or 5s look good. So those three might go nicely together. I know these two plants here are both female, and I know this one here is male. So I'm going to keep it over here sort of separately. I've got these seedlings. I might keep them in around the base of the mother plant, and then at the back, maybe even up against that rock, we'll put that big stick. So that gives me a bit of an approximation of how this might look. So with that all said and done, I'll take these plants out, and we're going to start by putting in the big one. All right. Just going to backfill a bit of this chunky soil. Now the thing I really like about this chunky soil in particular is that it already kind of approximates habitat style soil because it's so rocky and chunky. Now that's going to just sit there like that for now. Rest that up there against the rock almost, and now I'll come back to that. Okay, that's good. Now seedlings, I want them to go in next to their big old mama, so we'll put one of them just in here, and there's the other one. This other one's seemingly gotten a little sunburnt at some point, but that's okay. All right, so parent plants in, seedlings in, backfill over those roots a little bit just to make them happy. Outstanding. All right, now we're going to do our trio over here on the back side of the rock. Okay, there's one in. Make a bit of space for this one's roots. No, in fact, let's go with the little one in there. This one, as you can see, It's got a strange, almost kind of mutant look about it, which is why I've decided it can go in here, because if you've seen any of my videos, you probably know I have an affinity for those sorts of things. Right, we can backfill that in a little bit more. Now I've got a few more rocks which we might add as well, just for a bit more interest and a bit more variety, add a bit more vertical space into this pot. You need to go back up there, prop you up with a bit of sandstone, old mate. Okay, beautiful, that's coming along okay. Maybe we'll go one more little rocky spire, just like that. Where's my third plant? If you can hear voices in the background, you'll have to excuse me. There are children playing basketball next door. Okay, now this one has got quite extensive roots, so clear a bit of space to get those roots all bedded down. Great, okay, that's looking pretty good. Now we're going to backfill. Doesn't matter if that goes a little bit above the plants themselves, because these are plants that can be quite buried in the soil in their own habitat, so it's not really a problem for them. It looks pretty messy at the moment, but that's why I've got a paintbrush to help me out. Now let's get that big rock back up again. Prop it up with some substrate underneath. Okay. Dogs barking, it's all happening in suburbia on the weekend. Okay. Now I've got one more plant to go in, and I'll chuck that in over on this other side of the pot now. Now this is all a bit rough, but we're going to tidy it up in a second. Now Euphorbia obeses live in a part of South Africa called the Karoo, which very dry, arid part of the nation. Sad thing about Euphorbia obesa, it's one of those plants that's so striking and it's so readily available in cultivation, and yet somehow the natural population of these plants has been decimated by poachers. I read somewhere that it's believed or estimated that there are far more plants now in cultivation than there are in the wild, purely because, well, number one, they're so easy to grow in cultivation, and number two, they're so distinctive that poachers have gone out and taken a huge number of them, which, well, it's ridiculous and insane that this is the world that we live in, but hey, what a surprise. Money talks. I know that'll make a few people unhappy. My plant poaching video is one of the more disliked videos on YouTube, because apparently there are people out there who think that it's their right to take any old plant from habitat. But anyway, I digress. This isn't about the environment. Now, I'm just going to use my paintbrush now, clear some of this rubbish and debris out, tidy it up a little bit. I've got some seedlings that are half buried, all sorts of things going on here. But as a starting point, I'm happy with how this is looking. Now I just need to fill in a few gaps. I'll edit this if I need to, if this is quite a tedious process, but I think it's kind of interesting to see how it all works. Now you can see these ones are a little bit low, so we'll make those a little bit higher. Backfill again. Why not? Now I've got some real big chunky rocks in amongst here, so I'm just going to Now use those to kind of decorate around the bigger one. Give it that sort of arid desert look. And now I'm going to take some of my decomposed granite, sprinkle it around a bit liberally. I'm probably going to need more of that, but that's all right. And there you go, a rough approximation habitat planter. I'm going to tidy this up. I'll show you the finished results in just a minute. Here we go. All right, I think everything's roughly where it's supposed to be. So I'm just at the point now of giving it a bit of a top dressing of the decomposed granite to give it that arid desert look. You can see this stuff here, just applying it fairly liberally all over everything, because what I will be doing in a minute is giving this whole pot the paintbrush treatment, which fairly delicate process, but probably worth having a look at. Let's see, get it in there. Now the thing that's well worth noting about a pot like this is that we're going to be bottom watering it, because top watering essentially is going to disturb all the gravel and, well, potentially this granite isn't a particularly porous thing anyway. It's got lots of very fine particles. It may not actually let much water permeate, and the plants, well, they want to be watered. So bottom watering, as you saw, there's a great whopping big hole at the bottom of this pot which water can get in, so we're just going to put it in a tray of water, or a big dish of water when it's time, and that will be quite sufficient, and it won't disturb the lovely habitat styling that we've got going. Okay, so now you can see I've got the paintbrush out, and the process here, I'm taking any of the dirt off the plants bodies themselves. That's not a big deal, but I think it just looks a little bit better. Giving them a little bit of space. Trying to fill in any little gaps. There we go, there's plenty of space around some of these big chunky rocks. Little seedlings being buried, so we'll clear that off as much as we can as well. I would strongly advise that you don't do this, particularly for the first time, with any plants that you particularly cherish. I've got about 20 Euphorbia obesas, and if they weren't happy about what I was doing here and these perished, well, I'll just go get some more. But if you're working with plants that you truly love, just be aware the first time you do anything there are inherent risks. So pick something that you aren't necessarily completely emotionally attached to, and give it a try with that first, I reckon. But hey, you do you. If you're a mad risk taker, go for your life. All right. Now, just finish it off with maybe a few little sandstone pebbles that I can just toss around, add a bit of visual interest. Now, I don't know if this is any good or not, but I'm pretty happy with that. I'll show it to you in a bit more of a close-up. But there we go. That is planter number 1. Now, thought I would share with you a bit of the process involved in making more of a clay heavy top dressing. So what I've done, I've actually gone out and I've scooped up a little bit of clay from a local park, given it a bit of a soil test just to make sure that it's not going to kill my plants. And it's very dry at the moment, so I'm adding a little bit of water to it, and in the true improvised fashion I'm going to give it a bit of a mix up with a screw. Just let it all soak that up. Now I have a plant that's already potted. You can see it's another little peyote button, a very cute little pot indeed. I'm just going to be using that one, nothing too complex. If you like getting messy, this is good for you. Now of course, once again, I need to stress that this is merely a top dressing. If you were to use a soil so dense and heavy as this in the pot itself as a substrate, that plant is going to retain so much moisture it is very likely to die. And I say that although in nature your little Lophophora williamsii do grow in quite clay heavy soils, again the nature of soil in habitat and the drainage properties in the environment very different to what we have in pots. So this is going to be messy. Essentially we're just getting the clay. In fact, I have a pretty cool rock here. I wonder if that'll fit. No, that's too big. I do have other cool rocks just generally in my substrate, so I'll chuck some of these around just to add a bit of, again, bit of variety to how the pot's laid out. Good idea to put them in before you stick the top dressing over the top. So there we go. As you can see, I've just chucked a couple of rocks in there. Nothing very exciting. Now we're going to take this and we're just going to lather it in. Now if you get it on the plant, that's okay. Don't worry too much about that. We do have a paintbrush to help us out with this. And we're just going to just load that in there. I reiterate that I'm not an expert at this. Don't look at this and think, oh, this guy, look at what he's doing, and replicate it. I know how to look after plants, but I'm not an artist. I'm merely here to give you some inspiration. This might die in 3 weeks' time. If it does, I'll let you know. So please, only muck around with plants that you're content if they pack it in. I don't want to be taking the blame because your most cherished, beautiful, highly expensive plant carked it because you slathered it with clay. Anyway, that's looking pretty hideous, but if we get a bit of kind of gravelly stuff, this is, we can just kind of sprinkle some stuff in there. I'll get some of my granite. It's disgusting, absolutely disgusting. I might just rinse my hands off. Convenient watering can. Multi-dimensional tools. How exciting. Anyway, all right, now I've got my hands again. I can pick things up. Beautiful. All right, grab a bit more gravel, just chuck it around fairly liberally. Do I have any sticks? Any dead stuff? Probably. I've probably got dead plants in the greenhouse that I could use. Anyway, that's fine. What's this? If I had dead grass, I could stick it in there. Anyway, I don't have any dead grass. I'll just use some more rocks for now. Now, that plant is pretty well covered up, so I'm going to try and wash that off now a little bit, or at least brush some of the clay away. I'll get some water on this brush in a minute and it'll certainly help me. Again, having a little bit of variation in terms of the size and the height of things in the pot, I find is a pretty valuable thing. So having some little valleys and some mounds going above or below the height of the pot itself, all of that adds a bit of, in my opinion anyway, visual interest to what we're doing. So, all right, I'm going to go get some water. I'll be back in a minute to try and clear some of this absolute horror show up. All right, watering can full of water. It's going to make things a little bit more useful now. Just, again, using the paintbrush. First and foremost, try and clear off some of that clay, the plant itself. The cool thing about this style of planter in the clay is, of course, unsurprisingly, the clay itself will dry up. And as the seedling starts to grow in size, these cool little cracks will radiate out from the clay itself. At least in theory, that's based on images I've seen. I'm not going to guarantee that's going to happen because I haven't seen it with my own eyes, but certainly that's how I've seen these plants appear. Oh, bloody hell. That's how I've seen these plants appear. And I've seen them pop up in my social medias and the like. Anyway, so there we go. Now the pot itself is an absolute horror show of clay. I'll try and get rid of that. I won't make you watch that. Now, I'm just going to mess some of this gravel and dirt and stuff around. Chuck a bit more in there. Just to make it, like I said, a bit of visual interest is good. If I was being a real pedant, these are plants that grow in limestone. And so I feel like I'd probably be using limestone chips or something, chunks of limestone, just to make this all happen. But you know, it is what it is. I don't have limestone, so we're working with sandstone today, because good old Sydney sandstone, it's everywhere. What's that? A leaf. Don't need a leaf in the pot. Okay, getting rid of some of this excess clay now. And again, this is a plant that's going to need to be bottom watered. It's not going to be particularly happy at all if I'm watering it from above. It'll also just muck up the clay, so you know, visually it won't be all that happy either. All right, so it's pretty close to finished. I'll just tidy that up now, and maybe if I can find a few other little bits and pieces, I'll stick them in there, and I'll be back in a second to wrap everything up. And there we go, finished product. All I did was add one more rock in, sprinkle a little bit of gravel in there, just to add a bit of visual variety, I suppose, and tidy it all up with the paintbrush, and finished product. And of course, then we also have that Euphorbia pot, if I can bring it over here without dropping it, which I'm pretty happy with as well. And you can see at the back, right here, the sad remnants of a Dendrocyckios socotrana. You might have seen that very sad specimen perished in my death in the greenhouse video. A fitting graveyard, I suppose. So these are going to go onto the shelf in the greenhouse now. They're going to be carefully watered, and they're going to hopefully be very happy and make me very happy. Like I said, I'm just a novice trying to give you some inspiration for some things you can do out here with your succulents. You could, if you wanted, put different species into a pot as well. However, you need to be really careful that the plants that you put together have similar watering, sun and air movement requirements. You don't want to put say, summer and winter dormant plants together. And really, don't put lithops with anything, I implore you. But the joy in making habitat staging is in the experimentation. So get out there, give it a crack, I reckon, and see how it goes. I'm Michael from Arid Zine. Hope you learned something. Happy growing.